I never imagined that the dream of owning my own home could turn into a living nightmare. I still remember the day it all started, the day I got the first letter from the HOA. I was standing in my living room, sunlight pouring through the windows, thinking about how lucky I was. My house was perfect, or at least it should have been. But then I read the words that made my blood run cold. They said that I didn't actually own the house, that my property belonged to the HOA. At first I laughed. Surely it was a clerical error. I mean, come on, how could someone claim ownership of my home? I had the paperwork, the deed, the closing documents. Everything was mine. But as I reread the letter, my laughter faded, replaced by a sinking, twisting feeling in my stomach. The letter wasn't a joke. It was serious. The language was precise, aggressive, almost threatening. Immediate compliance required, unauthorized occupancy subject to fines and legal action. My hands shook, my heart pounded. I kept asking myself, how could this be happening? I had bought this house fair and square. This was supposed to be the start of my life, not the start of a nightmare. Then the reality hit me. This wasn't just about some weird HOA rule or a minor fine. This was about control, about power, about people who thought they could tell me what I could or couldn't do with the very place I lived, and they weren't going to let it go. I looked around my house. The walls I had painted, the garden I had planted, the little tree I had nurtured from a sapling. And suddenly, it felt like none of it belonged to me. It was surreal, like I had stepped into some twisted alternate reality where the rules made no sense, and the people enforcing them were determined to break me. I called a few neighbors, hoping for support or at least some guidance. Some were sympathetic, whispering in hushed voices about their own battles with the HOA. Others, though, looked at me with fear, as if merely talking about it would make them targets too. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. You could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way the mailman lingered a little longer at the end of my driveway. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe this was just the beginning of a bureaucratic misunderstanding. Maybe they'd see the truth once I showed my documents. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The letter was more than words on paper, it was a warning. And I had a growing sense that this was only the first move in a long, relentless game they were about to play. That night I sat alone in the living room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the times I had felt proud of this house. Every corner held a memory, every wall held a story. And now someone wanted to erase it all, not with kindness but with threats and intimidation. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask. How far would they go? Would they actually try to take my home? Could I fight them? Could anyone? I remember feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. Fear, because the situation was bigger than me, scarier than I had ever imagined. But determination too, because deep down, I knew I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. This house was mine, not just on paper, but in every way that mattered. And if they wanted to try and take it, they were going to find out very quickly that I wasn't someone who gave up easily. As I lay in bed that night, sleep refused to come. I kept picturing the HOA president, her smug face, the way she would write letters as if she had the right to decide who lived where. I imagined what she would do next, how she would try to assert control. And then, almost like a spark in the dark, an idea began to form in my mind. An idea that seemed crazy, dangerous, but maybe the only way to fight back. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the start of a battle that would change my life forever. And it all began with one simple, terrifying truth. My house was mine, and if they wanted it, they were going to have to go through me. But I had no idea just how far the HOA would go, or how much I was about to risk just to prove it. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The kind of knot that doesn't go away no matter how many times you tell yourself everything will be fine. I made coffee, tried to eat breakfast, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every little sound outside the window made me jump. Was it a neighbor, a mailman, or worse, the HOA coming to make good on their threats? And then it arrived, another letter, this one thicker, heavier, with that unmistakable HOA logo at the top. My heart sank as I tore it open. They claimed the most absurd thing I had ever heard. Part of my property, the land, the house, even some of my landscaping, actually belonged to them. According to the letter, every time I used my property without their permission, I was in violation. I couldn't believe it. I read it 3 times, thinking maybe, just maybe, I was missing something. No, it was all there in black and white. They said I was trespassing on my own house. I laughed at first, but it was a hollow laugh, the kind that shakes you inside. My neighbors had warned me that this HOA was difficult, ridiculous, power-hungry, but I never imagined it would get this far. I stared at the letter as if it were a bomb about to go off. And in a way, it was. My life was about to explode. I decided to call a friend, someone who had been through HOA battles before. He picked up on the first ring, his voice tired but familiar. "They're insane," he said without hesitation. "People like that, they love control. They'll push until someone breaks. You need to be ready for everything." "Everything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything," he said. "They'll lie, manipulate, even drag you to court if they think it'll scare you. Don't let them. And whatever you do, don't give them the satisfaction of fear." I hung up staring at the wall. Fear was already there. It was clawing at me. But his words also planted a seed, defiance. Maybe I couldn't ignore this. Maybe I had to fight. That afternoon, I walked around my house, taking in every detail. The freshly painted walls, the little garden I'd spent months nurturing, the driveway where my kids had chalked hopscotch squares. Everything that was mine, at least, it had been mine. Now it felt like a stage set, with invisible strings being pulled by people who had no right to touch it. I went to the mailbox and found another letter, this one even more aggressive. They were threatening fines, legal action, and if I didn't comply, police involvement. My stomach dropped. They weren't bluffing. This was no longer just annoying bureaucracy. This was a war, and I hadn't even picked up my weapons yet. Neighbors whispered as I walked past. Some shook their heads, murmuring about people who had lost it because of the HOA. Others gave me looks of fear, like one wrong step, and I'd vanish into a world I couldn't return from. I realized painfully that I was on my own. No one could fight this for me. I had to be clever, calm, and maybe a little crazy. I spent that evening reading every letter, every clause, every tiny footnote in the HOA's rules. They had an army of lawyers, dozens of bylaws, and a sense of entitlement that made my blood boil. But somewhere in those pages I also found cracks, the loopholes, the contradictions, the mistakes they had made thinking I wouldn't notice. I realized then that I had two choices, surrender or fight. Surrender meant giving up everything I had worked for, letting these people claim my house, my land, my life. Fight meant taking risks, doing things I had never imagined I'd do, and standing my ground against a group that thrived on fear. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them win. But I also knew this wasn't going to be easy. Every step I took from here on out would be watched, challenged, and pushed to the brink. Every decision could escalate the battle. And the worst part? I didn't yet know just how far the HOA was willing to go or how dangerous this fight would become. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the battle ahead. My house was mine, every brick, every beam, and if they wanted to try to take it, they were going to have to go through me. But even as I steeled myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge, the moment that would change everything, was just around the corner. And when it came, it wouldn't just be about letters or fines. It would be about power, pride, and something I wasn't sure I could handle. And that's when I made a decision that would change everything. I thought the letters were bad. I thought the threats were the worst part, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment she showed up in person. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished checking my mail for the 5th time that hour when I heard the sound of heels clicking on the driveway. Sharp, deliberate, commanding, I looked up and froze. There she was, the HOA president herself, Karen. She didn't just walk. She prowled like she owned the street, even though, technically, she didn't own a single square inch of my property. Her orange blazer was bright enough to signal a warning from miles away, and she held a folder full of papers like a shield. Her expression said everything I needed to know. She was here to intimidate me. I stepped outside, trying to appear calm. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Oh, I think you can help me," she said, her tone sharp, clipped, dripping with authority. "You've been violating HOA regulations, using property that doesn't belong to you, demolishing structures without permission. Do you even understand the consequences of your actions?" I blinked, demolishing structures. This was just letters and threats. I hadn't done anything yet. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "I own this house. I have the deed, the paperwork." "Your paperwork doesn't change reality," she interrupted, waving her folder like a weapon. "This house, this land, it's all under HOA jurisdiction. You need to comply immediately or we will escalate. You could face fines, legal action, even arrest." Arrest, the word hit me like a punch to the stomach. Arrested for living in my own house? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Mostly I wanted to walk away and pretend none of this was happening. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. If I let her intimidate me now, it would only get worse. I squared my shoulders. "With all due respect, you're wrong. I legally own this house, and I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes narrowed. I could see the frustration building. She wasn't used to people talking back or refusing to cower. "You don't understand," she said, her voice lowering almost a hiss. "We control this neighborhood. Everyone does what we say. Everyone follows the rules, and you're about to learn the hard way what happens when someone defies us." I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear but from anger. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about control, and Karen was trying to assert hers over my life. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and over fences. I could feel their eyes on me, silently judging, silently hoping I would give in. But I couldn't, not now. I took a deep breath. "I will comply with the law, but you don't get to decide ownership of my property. That's not how it works. And if you try to involve the police over this, you'll see exactly how serious I am about defending my home." Her face twisted in disbelief, as if no one had ever spoken to her like that. You think you can defy me? You think you can ignore the rules?" "I don't think," I said slowly, deliberately. "I know." For a moment, she seemed to falter. Maybe she wasn't expecting confrontation. Maybe she thought I'd crumble under the weight of her authority. But then her lips tightened into a thin line, her hands gripping her folder like she was ready to throw it. "I'll be back," she said finally, her voice low, dangerous. "And next time you won't be able to talk your way out of this. Consider this your final warning." And with that, she turned on her heels and left, clicking down the driveway like a storm had passed. But the storm wasn't over. I stood there staring after her, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was far from over. Karen had shown up to assert power, to intimidate, to terrify me. And now I knew the next step would be more dangerous, more intense, and potentially life-changing. I went back inside, packing the living room. I thought about the letters, the threats, the neighbors watching silently, waiting for the inevitable. And then a thought hit me. If she thought she could scare me into submission, she had another thing coming. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet. But I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her or the HOA take my home from me. Not without a fight. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, looking at my house like I had never seen it before. Every beam, every brick, every corner, it was mine. And I would do whatever it took to protect it. But deep down, I also knew the fight was about to get messy, because Karen wasn't going to stop, and neither could I. After Karen left that afternoon, I sat alone in my living room staring at the walls I had built with my own hands. The house that should have been my sanctuary now felt like a battlefield. Every letter, every threat, every furious glance from her face was echoing in my mind. I knew one thing for certain: the HOA was not going to stop, and if I wanted to protect my home, I had to act, and fast. I pulled out the stack of letters, the mountain of rules, and my property deeds. I read them over and over, dissecting every word. And as I did, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan so audacious, so daring, that I almost laughed out loud at its absurdity. I knew the HOA thrived on fear and compliance. If I wanted to fight, I had to do something they couldn't ignore, something that would make them realize that I wasn't a scared homeowner, but a force they could not control. And the more I thought about it, the more it seemed crazy enough to work. The problem was obvious. Any conventional legal route would take months, maybe years, and I didn't have that kind of time. Every day, Karen and her army of letters and threats made my life miserable. I needed immediate action, something visual, undeniable, dramatic. I started packing, imagining every possible scenario. Could I just ignore them? I asked myself. No, they would escalate. Could I negotiate? Possibly, but only if they thought I was scared. And I was, not anymore. Then the thought hit me like lightning. What if I forced them to confront reality? What if I made it impossible for them to claim control without exposing the absurdity of their actions? It was risky, insane, and borderline dangerous. But as I looked around my home, I realized this was my only option. I spent the next few hours sketching ideas, jotting down possibilities, imagining the reaction of Karen and the HOA board when faced with an undeniable truth. I was not backing down. Each idea I wrote felt like a spark of rebellion, a tiny explosion of hope in the tension-filled air of my living room. Neighbors peeked over their fences, whispering to each other, probably wondering if I had finally lost it. Maybe I had, but desperation can do strange things to a person. It forces creativity, it forces courage, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a strange sense of power. By nightfall, I had a rough plan. It was bold, it was risky, and it was my only chance to prove that my house and my life could not be dictated by an overreaching HOA. I didn't share the plan with anyone. This had to be my fight, my rules, my reckoning. The idea of Karen showing up the next day, expecting fear, and instead finding someone ready to stand their ground filled me with a strange mix of adrenaline and terror. I stayed awake most of the night, thinking, rethinking, and mentally rehearsing every step. I imagined Karen storming onto my property, expecting compliance and instead encountering the impossible. The thought made me shiver, not from fear, but from excitement. Even as I drifted off to sleep, I knew that once morning came, nothing would ever be the same. This was no longer about letters, rules, or fines. It was about power, control, and standing up for what was mine. And deep down, I knew I was ready to go further than anyone, including the HOA, had ever imagined. The tension was unbearable, but it also sharpened my focus. Every detail mattered. Every moment counted. One wrong move could ruin everything. And yet the risk made the plan all the more necessary. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold. I didn't know how the HOA would react. But one thing was certain. Karen had underestimated me. And when I finally acted, she would learn that some homeowners aren't afraid to fight back, no matter how insane it seems. And as I lay awake that night, I whispered to myself, half in fear, half in determination. If they think they can take my house, they're going to have to go through me, and I'm not holding anything back. The morning air felt electric as I stepped outside. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering like a drum. Today wasn't just another day in the neighborhood. It was the day everything changed. Every ounce of fear I had felt since receiving those letters had transformed into determination. The plan I had been rehearsing in my mind all night was about to become reality. I glanced at my house, the walls and beams that had once been my pride and joy. Today they were part of a statement, my defiance. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their whispers carrying across the street. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others stared wide-eyed. I could almost hear their thoughts. What is he thinking? Is he crazy? Maybe I was. But sometimes, crazy was the only way to fight back against people like Karen. I took a deep breath and started. The first swing of the sledgehammer felt surreal. Dust flew into the sunlight and the sound echoed like a drumbeat in an empty hall. With every hit, a mix of emotions surged through me: anger, frustration, adrenaline, and a strange, exhilarating freedom. I wasn't just demolishing walls. I was tearing down the illusion that anyone could control me. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Karen. She had arrived, sprinting down the driveway, waving papers, her face twisted in fury. "Stop! You can't do that!" she screamed, her voice sharp and piercing. I didn't look at her, I kept swinging. Every crack of the hammer, every splinter of wood breaking apart was a message. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't stopping. Neighbors began to gather, some cheering, some silently horrified. I could feel their energy feeding into mine, a strange combination of fear and exhilaration that made me feel unstoppable. Karen's shouts grew louder, more frantic, but they were just noise now. She didn't understand the stakes. She didn't understand that this wasn't just about walls and windows. It was about asserting ownership over my life. I could hear sirens in the distance, the faint wail growing louder. The police, summoned by the HOA, were on their way. My stomach twisted, but I didn't falter. This was it, the moment of truth. I had to show beyond any doubt that my house, my land, and my home belonged to me. Karen ran closer, her heels clicking against the driveway, papers flapping like flags of war. "You'll regret this," she screamed. "Fines, arrest, legal action." I paused for just a second and looked at her. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice calm but firm. "This house is mine, every brick, every beam, and no amount of letters, threats, or intimidation is going to change that." Her eyes widened with disbelief, and in that moment I saw something else too: fear. She had never faced resistance like this. She had always commanded, always intimidated, always won. And for the first time, she realized that her power over me was an illusion. The sirens grew louder, and I could see the flashing lights reflecting off the windows. Neighbors whispered, some even laughing nervously. The chaos was perfect. This was the showdown I had been preparing for, the moment where words became action. And then, just as the first police car pulled up, I lifted my hammer one final time and brought it down with everything I had. The wall cracked, splintered, and fell. Dust filled the air. Debris tumbled to the ground like confetti at the end of a bizarre, twisted parade. Karen screamed again, running to the edge of the yard, waving her arms helplessly. "This is a crime. You'll be arrested." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The message was clear. No letters, no threats, no bureaucracy could intimidate me into surrendering my home. As the police arrived, their faces confused, trying to understand the scene before them, I felt a strange mixture of relief and tension. Relief, because the first step of the plan had worked. Tension, because this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't going to back down. The HOA wasn't finished. I wiped sweat from my brow, looking at the partially demolished wall and the chaos surrounding me. This was no longer just a fight for my house. It was a fight for justice, for sanity, for proving that some battles couldn't be won with fear and intimidation. And deep down, I knew the next confrontation, police, HOA, the legal system, was going to test me like nothing else ever had. But one thing was certain: I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The moment I saw the police cars pull up, my chest tightened. Sirens blaring, lights flashing, and officers stepping out cautiously. It was like a scene from a movie, except this was real. I had prepared for confrontation, but not for the sheer intensity of reality. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced myself to stand tall. This was my home. This was my fight. Karen was already at the edge of the yard, her face red with rage, pointing furiously at me. "He's demolishing property. Arrest him now," she shouted. Her voice carried a mix of desperation and triumph. I could see it. The moment she thought she had me cornered, trapped by bureaucracy and law enforcement. The first officer approached slowly, notebook in hand, his expression cautious. "Sir," he said, "can you explain what's going on here?" I took a deep breath. Every second mattered. "This is my property," I said firmly. "I legally own this house. Every brick, every beam, every inch of this land belongs to me. I am defending my home from false claims made by the HOA." The officer looked skeptical. "The HOA claims ownership." "And they're wrong," I interrupted. "Completely wrong. I have the deeds. I have the documentation. I have followed every law. They are attempting to intimidate me into surrendering my home." Karen stepped forward, waving her papers like weapons. "He's lying. You need to arrest him. He's committing a crime right in front of you." The officer raised a hand, motioning for her to step back. I could feel my heart racing. This was the moment where things could go either way. One wrong word, one misstep, and suddenly I would be handcuffed for defending what was mine. I stayed calm even as Karen's screams grew louder, almost surreal. I kept my eyes steady on the officer. "I'm not trying to argue," I said. "I'm asking you to look at the facts, my documents, my deed, my house. This is not a crime. This is me standing up for my home." The officer glanced at the papers Karen held, then at me. His eyes flicked to the deed on my clipboard. A pause hung in the air, long enough to make my stomach tighten. He looked between us, clearly trying to process the chaos. A homeowner swinging a sledgehammer at a wall, an HOA president yelling like it was a battlefield, and a neighborhood watching silently from behind curtains. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, careful. "Ma'am, we can't act on these claims without proof. Sir, can you provide documentation?" I nodded, handing over my deeds and relevant paperwork. My hands were steady now, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I watched as he examined every page, flipping slowly, his brow furrowed. Karen's face fell as she realized that the documents spoke louder than her words. Another officer walked up, looking at the half-demolished wall, the debris, and the chaos surrounding the house. "Looks like someone's doing a lot of work here," he said cautiously, trying not to laugh but failing to hide a smirk. Karen's eyes widened. She had expected immediate compliance, fear, maybe even an arrest. But that wasn't happening, not today, not to me. Finally, the first officer spoke again, this time firmly. "Sir, based on the documents and what I see here, you are the legal owner of this property. We cannot arrest you." A weight lifted off my chest, but I didn't relax entirely. Karen's fury was palpable, a storm barely contained, and I knew this wouldn't be the last confrontation. The HOA had already escalated this far, and if they couldn't intimidate me now, they would try something else, something bigger. The officers left, shaking their heads slightly, leaving Karen standing alone in the yard, fuming. Her face twisted in disbelief and rage. I could almost hear her thoughts. How did this happen? How did he beat me at my own game? I took a deep breath, looking around at the mess, the partially demolished wall, the scattered debris, the neighbors peeking from windows. Relief surged through me, but I knew the fight was far from over. Karen wasn't done. The HOA wasn't done. And neither was I. I stepped back into my living room, looking at the walls I had saved, the land I had defended, and made a promise to myself. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about standing up to people who thought fear could control me, about proving that ownership, pride, and courage mattered more than bureaucracy and intimidation. The adrenaline finally began to ebb, but the tension lingered. I knew the next move, the legal battle, the court hearings, the final showdown was coming. And when it did, I had to be ready. Because this time there would be no swinging a hammer. There would be no chance to prove myself physically. The fight would be on paper, in a courtroom, and in front of an audience that had already been watching. And I had no intention of losing. The courtroom smelled like tension and polished wood, a scent that immediately made my stomach tighten. I had been here before in my mind, imagining what it would be like to face the HOA's lawyers, to confront the absurdity of their claims, but nothing could prepare me for the reality. I sat at the plaintiff's table, documents neatly stacked in front of me, my hands gripping the edges so tightly my knuckles whitened. Across the room, Karen sat with her lawyer, both wearing expressions of smug confidence. She looked at me like I was the problem she could easily crush. I returned her gaze, calm and steady, though inside, my heart was racing. The judge entered and the room fell silent. The air seemed to thicken as papers shuffled and pens clicked. Every eye was on us, waiting, judging, anticipating the drama about to unfold. Karen's lawyer was the first to speak. He launched into a tirade of claims so absurd, I almost laughed out loud. "Your Honor, the defendant has unlawfully occupied property that falls under the jurisdiction of the HOA. By demolishing structures without approval, he has violated multiple bylaws and, frankly, common sense." I took a deep breath, suppressing the urge to stand up and respond with sarcasm. Unlawfully occupied? Common sense? This was my house, my land, my life, but I knew I had to remain calm. The fight wasn't about yelling, it was about proof, facts, evidence, reality. When my turn came, I spoke clearly and deliberately, my voice carrying over the hushed courtroom. "Your Honor, I am the legal owner of this property. I have the deed, the purchase agreement, and all required documentation. Every action I have taken has been within my rights as the homeowner. The HOA's claims are not only false, they are an attempt to intimidate and seize control of property that is not theirs." I laid the documents on the table, spreading them like a shield, showing every page, every signature, every official mark. Karen's lawyer looked increasingly flustered, flipping through pages, muttering under his breath. The tension in the room was palpable. I could feel the energy shift as the truth slowly sank in. The judge leaned forward, reviewing the documents carefully. "Sir," he said finally, his voice steady, These appear to be in order. The HOA's claims are not substantiated by the evidence before me. Corinne's face twitched. Her confidence faltered. She opened her mouth, likely to object, but the judge raised a hand. Order in this courtroom. If you wish to proceed, you will provide proof that contradicts these documents. Otherwise, this case is dismissed. I could barely contain my relief, but I kept my posture rigid, my expression calm. I had anticipated her desperation. I had anticipated every tactic she could throw at me. And now, finally, the court saw what I had known all along. Ownership was mine. Corinne's lawyer sputtered, attempting to salvage something, anything, from the ruins of their argument. But the evidence was irrefutable. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp, decisive thunk. Case dismissed. The property is legally owned by the defendant. A hush fell over the courtroom. Corinne sat frozen, her fury barely contained. Her face twisted with disbelief and frustration. For once, the power she had wielded so freely over our neighborhood had no effect here. The rules, the letters, the threats, they meant nothing in the face of truth. As I packed my documents and rose to leave, I felt a wave of vindication. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: freedom. This house, my home, my life, was mine again. No letters, no fines, no intimidation. Outside the courtroom, neighbors approached, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. "You actually did it," one whispered. "I thought she would win." I smiled, a little weary but proud. "No," I said. "She lost, because sometimes you have to fight even when it seems impossible, even when everyone else is scared, and sometimes you have to swing a hammer to remind people what's yours." Corinne walked past, avoiding eye contact. I could see the storm inside her, anger, humiliation, disbelief, but I didn't care. The battle was over. The house was mine. And the lesson was clear. No one, not even a powerful HOA, could take it without a fight. I looked back at my home as we drove away, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. The walls, the garden, the land, it was all intact. My home had survived bureaucracy, threats, and intimidation. I had survived. But even as I celebrated, a small thought lingered. The HOA wouldn't just disappear quietly. They might regroup, plan, or try again in some twisted way. But for now, this was victory. A hard-fought, thrilling, and absolutely satisfying victory. And as I stood there, looking at my house in the late afternoon sunlight, I knew one thing for certain. No amount of rules, threats, or arrogance could ever take away what I had fought so hard to protect. The courtroom drama was over, but the aftermath still hung heavy in the air. Walking back to my house felt surreal. The neighborhood seemed quieter, almost reverent. People had witnessed what no one thought was possible, a single homeowner standing up to the power-hungry HOA and winning. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion, relief, and triumph. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Corinne standing there. She wasn't waving papers. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't trying to assert authority. She just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes locked on me. For a moment, the old tension returned, that familiar feeling of being challenged, tested, pushed to my limits. But it was different now. I wasn't scared. I was unstoppable. I stepped out of the car and faced her. "It's over," I said simply. "The court ruled, the house is mine, everything else is just noise." She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and stalked back toward the HOA office, her heels clicking like a warning, a reminder that while I had won, she was still the same relentless force she had always been. But that was her problem, not mine. I walked around my property, taking it all in, the garden, the walls, the driveway, the corners I had feared losing. Every inch was mine, every tree, every flower, every brick. And for the first time in months, I felt safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. I had fought fear with courage, intimidation with truth, and absurdity with determination. Neighbors came out of their houses, one by one, offering congratulations, pats on the back, even hugs. Some admitted they had doubted me, some whispered that they were inspired. I smiled, though I felt the weight of everything still pressing on me. This wasn't just my victory. It was a statement for everyone in the neighborhood who had felt powerless, belittled, or bullied by the HOA. That evening I sat on my porch, the sun dipping low behind the trees. The house was quiet, peaceful. The chaos, the threats, the tension, they were behind me. And yet a small part of me couldn't help but reflect on what it had taken to get here. The letters, the intimidation, the demolition, the police, the courtroom, all of it had been exhausting, terrifying, but ultimately necessary. I realized something important. Owning a home isn't just about property or deeds. It's about standing up for yourself. About protecting what's yours, no matter how absurd or overwhelming the challenge. And sometimes, it means taking risks that feel impossible, facing people who seem invincible, and refusing to back down. The HOA had tried to control me. They had tried to scare me. They had tried to erase the work, pride, and life I had built in this house. But none of it worked. Not because I was fearless, but because I refused to surrender. Because I refused to let fear dictate my life. That night I lit a small fire in the backyard fire pit, sitting alone, reflecting. I thought about Karen, about the lawyers, about the neighbors who had watched silently for months. And I smiled, thinking about how absurd the whole situation had been, yet how real it was. This house, this life, this victory, it was mine, and no one could take it away. As I stared into the flames, I whispered to myself, I demolished my own house, and I won. Not because I wanted destruction, but because I wanted truth. And nothing, not even an overbearing HOA, can take what is rightfully yours. The wind carried a faint sound of celebration from the neighborhood. Some had lit their own small fires, others cheered quietly, all secretly acknowledging the battle that had just been won. I realized that this wasn't just my story. It was everyone's story who had ever felt bullied, underestimated, or powerless. It was proof that courage and persistence could overcome absurdity, injustice, and fear. And as the stars came out, I finally felt it, the deep, unshakable peace of a battle fought and won. The house stood firm, the land untouched, and I stood taller than I had in months. The HOA had tried, they had failed, and I had learned something far more valuable than property rights. I had learned the strength of standing up for yourself. I took one last look around, whispering almost to the night itself. This is my home, my life, my victory. And no one, not letters, not threats, not even an entire HOA, can ever take that from me. The wind whispered back in agreement, carrying with it the quiet, undeniable truth. Some battles are worth fighting, and some victories, no matter how hard-earned, are forever. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.